Clement is on X
at The Real Clement M.
So, on our World of Work feature this morning, we're discussing how to deal with grief when you are in the workplace. Grief is part of life, and as an adult, you take your grief wherever you go, right? This is not something you leave at home, and that includes taking it into the workplace. And we live in a world that pushes productivity and performance, and many workplaces, if we're being honest, are not even equipped to deal with loss, whether it's the death of a loved one or the end of a relationship or any other major life change. So grief in the workplace can show up in so many ways. There are people who will miss deadlines because they are going through grief. They'll have glazed over eyes, unexpected outbursts, you name it. So the truth really is that grief doesn't really stay at home. And I want us to have a conversation about how we can deal with grief in the workplace, but also as employers, what you can do to support your employees who are going through that. Anja van Beek is a talent and culture strategist, leadership and HR expert and executive coach who's going to guide us through this conversation. But I'm also interested in your own reflections and your own experiences of how you've dealt with grief in the workplace. I mean, many leaders overlook that grief isn't just emotional, right? It's physical, it's neurological, it changes how the brain processes information, how the body handles stress, how the person shows up day to day. So if you felt and dealt with grief at work, how did you deal with it? How did you manage? And as employers, have you created an environment that is safe and conducive for people who are going through grief while they're still being productive at work? Anja, thank you so much for making time for us. Good morning.
Morning, Clement. So lovely to be here today.
Yeah. Take us through some ways that grief actually shows up in the workplace.
Yeah, thank you so much. And I just want to build on what you said in the intro. It's so important. The leaders that I work with, often I see that they're so confident when it comes to strategy and business discussions, for example, geographical expansion. But when it comes to the people side of the business, then they don't necessarily share the same level of confidence. Now, what I want leaders to know in the workplace is if you need to understand what's happening in a human's brain when they're going through grief, they will understand why high performance might suddenly struggle with deadlines or forget details or sometimes even feel overwhelmed with simple tasks. Now, what we need to understand that as humans, we are wired for connection, and our brains have an internal map of our loved one and almost expect them to be present. Now, these maps or neural pathways are not updated instantly. So that's why the brain keeps searching and expecting them to be back or to be present. And that's why it leads to confusion and distraction. Now, also to remember that when someone grieves, it affects and impacts their prefrontal cortex. And as you know, that's the executive functioning associated with executive functioning, which governs our planning, our priorities, focus and decision making, and even emotional regulation. So we can understand that when one of our team members or ourselves is going through grief, it definitely impacts the way that we show up at work. If you then have a look at what's happening in our bodies, the stress response is activated. And what's happening when the stress response is activated? When it's that fight or flight mode, cortisol is released. And that's when our sleep is disrupted, our immunity is weakened, and we're even fatigued. Now, thinking of someone sitting in a meeting, if we take note that social pain or emotional pain is experienced in exactly the same way as physical pain, you can understand that it's sometimes difficult for them to sit in a meeting or focus on a task when they literally feel the heaviness or the tension in their bodies.
Yeah.
And I think to understand that the brain needs to relearn this whole world without the loved one, that takes time and repetition. And as you said, compassion from the workplace.
And of course, it affects how we focus. It affects our memory, our performance on the jobs. So the question then is, how then can we arm ourselves with the framework of sorts so that we're able to still be productive in the workplace while we go through grief? And what do you think is the responsibility of the leaders, the employers themselves? Because I wonder, what is it that most leaders get wrong when dealing with grief in their teams?
Yeah. So I think the one thing that I have seen is that leaders does not necessarily understand that the brain toggles between a loss orientation and a restoration orientation for a very, very long time. So it might be that the team members show up at work and everything seems fine, and then just the following day or the following hour, it seems as if it's a different person sitting in front of you. So just to understand that is the way that the brain manages grief. This dual process model, and for us to understand that it can be quite disruptive. Now, I think where the leaders can come in and how they can support the team members is for us to understand that a leader is not a psychologist. We're not trained to do that. But what we can do is we can create an environment where people feel supportive, where they feel seen and heard. And I think the first thing there is to co-create a plan with that individual of how do we need to phase in responsibilities, what is the check-in cadence that we need, or, what's the communication about energy level. So it's almost about supporting them and their brains without feeling overwhelmed with basic tasks. And that can be different things in different ways. So first of all, to not have a cognitive overload. So avoid assigning complex or high-stake tasks immediately. It might even just be that awareness of their emotional availability. They might not be ready for activities like the mentorship relationship if they're in one. So you can see there's so many different ways to support them. The one that I think is very easy is to have grace beyond policy, because all of us has policies, family responsibility leave, bereavement leave, whatever they might call it. But for the leader to offer informal flexibility, so perhaps some additional remote days, perhaps even just using the types of word that they use to say, so are you ready to lead again, versus we will build a plan together and when you feel ready. So you can see there's subtle changes that we can do. The one thing, Clement, that I have seen, and I would love to hear the listeners' view on this, is that often the leaders are so uncomfortable that they avoid the topic altogether. So they don't even acknowledge. And
sometimes they don't even know what to say. They're scared of saying the wrong thing.
They're scared of saying the wrong thing. And in that moment, I think it's just about acknowledging the loss, sending a signal that I'm present, I'm here for support, I'm not going to pressure you, and creating a space for, depending on the individual, some people prefer the silence and others prefer sharing. But yeah, it is that subtle message. So I think acknowledging it and just letting them feel it's okay to be human and it's okay to whatever is showing up for them, and that you're there for support.
The days that are already allocated for bereavement leave, are those really enough? And what more can HR do? I hear what you say about maybe sometimes be informal about what you're offering, maybe even like flexible working conditions during that period. But do you think that there's space for some of these laws to be reconsidered, even around how many days you get for bereavement?
Absolutely. I remember when I was in corporate, still working full-time, we called it family responsibility leave, and that was 5 days, which was more than the 3 days that I think the BCEA recommends. So to your question, what can HR and what can leaders do different? And I think the first thing, or the option for them to consider, is to offer an opt-in disclosure so that the individual themselves controls what they share, with who they share it, when they share it, or even asking for support. So it's almost as if you give a little bit more power to that individual. But back to your question about the policy, if we just take how long it takes for someone to really, form those neuro pathways, because it takes time and repetition, then the 3 days, in my view, is definitely not sufficient. And usually after 3, 4, 5 months, I don't know, you can say the time frame, then everyone is expected, okay, you're now back to business as usual. And that's sometimes when they need more support or more time. So I think when we think of the leave policies, I think we need to be mindful of that. When we talk about loss, as you said, it might not only be a loss of a loved one, it might perhaps be a miscarriage, it might be a divorce, or even a tough diagnosis that's really life-changing. And I think if we then can change the wording in our policies, that can help to not talk about bereavement leave, but perhaps talk about a significant life disruption or a personal loss or something like that.
Because there are a lot of things that we grieve, right? And it's not just through death that we experience grief. How flexible then should employers be around? Because there are people who go through breakups, relationships and marriages, and there are tough diagnoses, and yet these people are still expected to just be productive and be at work like nothing happened. How do you then advise employers listening to us to sort of broach conversations like that? Yeah.
So I think that that's the focus of having a human-centric culture. Because in the end, it's the managers or the leaders' responsibility to create that environment where someone can thrive. Now, as you said in the beginning, no one else except yourself can motivate you. And there's a responsibility on the individual as well to make sure that they deal with whatever they're facing in their in their life. But then at the workplace, for HR and perhaps the leaders to model vulnerability, because it's about building that psychological safe space. And when you model vulnerability and perhaps share stories of your own heartache, miscarriage, or divorce, then it's normalizing asking for support. And then in the end, I think it's also important for the leaders to know who's sitting in front of them, because it's different for each and every one of us. And if you have those regular check-ins, perhaps after week 1, have a check-in where you signal care, you not necessarily signal support or unnecessary expectations, but just no pressure to reply to this email. I'm checking in, thinking of you, and let me know if there's anything I can do to take something off your plate. And then after 4 weeks, just check in and invite some feedback, because if you have now co-created a plan and perhaps was a little bit more softer on the targets and not necessarily taking away the ownership and the accountability, but just giving a little bit more leeway on the timelines, then after 4 weeks you can check in and just say, how's the return been going, anything that we need to adjust or tweak. And then to continue after 3 months, 4 months, just to continue asking that. By now people often stop asking how you are. I haven't forgotten, I'm still here, let's talk if we need to shift things. And I think that's then demystifying that perception that it's a few weeks and then it's over and done with, which is not.
Because there's some leaders that will say, but I'm not vulnerable. I don't know how to be there. So what difference does it make when leaders show their own vulnerability in moments like that? Yeah.
So, when we think of a psychological safe space, so let me give you this explanation, and that might clarify it. So there's a lovely definition by Brené Brown, and she says, if we want our employees to show up and solve problems, serve our customers, and be innovative, as leaders, we need to create an environment where people feel seen, heard, safe, and respected. And if you're vulnerable, you actually, you're walking the talk. So it's not as if I want you to speak up or I want you to share something, but I'm leading with that. So I think what we need to remember is that humans do have different emotions. And sometimes when you see the anger, the fear, the sadness in the workplace, people are uncomfortable in a meeting. Imagine now you're sitting in a one-on-one and the person across the table is starting to cry or they're sad. We're not trained to do that. And I think for leaders, if they can take one thing away, is in that moment, signal, give that message that it's okay to be human, it's okay to have that feeling. Let me recommend recommend someone that can support you. So it might either be the employee assistance program or it might be another professional. But in that moment, just let them know it's okay to be human.
To be human, yeah. John, you're calling us from Winchester Hills. Good morning.
Good morning, Clement. Thank you, ma'am, for quite an interesting topic. Earlier this year, I think beginning of Jan, first week of Jan, I lost my wife. Very young. She was only 42 years old. You know the support that I got from my company. It was so magnificent. But who drove that support? My immediate line manager. All right. He went to HR. He said, look, this person is not in a good space. I lost my mom in 2022. So you can imagine now, January 2025, I lost my wife. And my wife was very close to my mother. So I went through a very, very traumatic space. And I've got 2 daughters and 1 boy. My youngest is 17 years old. You can imagine the fear. The pain, but my boss went to HR, asked for an additional, instead of giving me 5 days compassionate leave, they gave me 2 months. They said, look, you can work from home, work at your own pace. I'll cover you most in terms of whatever is needed. Come again, I'll check in on you. They also went as far as getting me counseling via iCares, just to go through the trauma that we went through. So sometimes it's not about policy, it's about humanity, it's about empathy. It's about acknowledging your employees. And I can tell you now, I'm prepared to retire at that place because of the small things. It's not always about rewards or money. It's about how you treat your human capital.
Absolutely. Oh, John. That's so incredible. Thank you so much for calling us, and I'm so sorry to hear about your wife. I wish you so much strength, to you and the kids. Anya, that's precisely what you've been talking about, right? Like humanity. It doesn't have to be about the laws and what the policy says. If someone is struggling, if you think they need extra time, why not give it to them?
Yeah. And John, as Clement said, we're so sorry for your loss, and I can just imagine your responsibilities now looking after the 2 daughters and the boy. But what I love about this example, is it's showing you that one size does not fit all. Because for John being a single dad now, his circumstances and his responsibility is different to perhaps a younger person or older person or whatever. So that's why, as you said, it's beyond the policy. And kudos to your line manager, because I say if we can just have more managers that focus on the individual. Because listen to what John said. I am prepared to go the extra mile. I'm loyal. I will now retire there. And that's the return on that little bit of investment in a time of need.
Anya, thank you so much. Thank you. I believe you've really assisted, especially a lot of leaders out there who probably often struggle with how to respond and how to approach instances where they have got employees or members of their teams that are struggling with grief. Anja van Beek is a talent and culture strategist.